Good evening from the beautiful state of Jefferson, near the foothills of Northern California. This is Fireside Chats. The state of Jefferson, a state of mind, if not a state in fact. Today is May 12th, 2019. Mother's Day. I had to work today on Mother's Day. And in my business, I often work weekends. So I contacted this other person that I'm working on a business deal with. And this lady hung up the phone on me and said, it's Mother's Day. I'm not doing any business today. And so I called her back and I said, you mind calling my mother and telling her why you're more important than she is and why I'm working with you and being hung up on and not spending it with her? And she cursed me out and hung the phone up. So I imagine we'll not be doing business together, me and Miss Congeniality. But here's something that makes me feel better. Podcasting and webcasting. And this one's been on the back burner for a while. So we're going to go ahead and talk about the amazing 1990 cult classic movie, Pump Up the Volume, starring Christian Slater. Christian Slater had been in some other kind of teen angsty movies, some B movies. Heathers, for example, may have been considered his big break, but this movie is what he's most known for and one of the projects that he most likes to be associated with. This movie introduced me to Soundgarden. This movie marks the changing of the guard, the changing over from the 80s into the 90s. Yes, sir. All the optimism and the fun movies for the kids and the party rock. The fog kind of cleared and things weren't so great in suburbia. And Pump Up the Volume was one of the first movies to really tap into that, to tap into the angst, the sense of unwellness that people growing up in that time, as we went from a good economy to a bad economy, to from peacetime into a fairly substantial war in the Persian Gulf. As we went from happier music to grunge and to gangsta rap, this movie really signifies that changeover. So let's take a look at the trailer. Feel free to punch in what you think when you see it.
Everybody knows that the dice are loaded. Everybody rolls with their fingers crossed.
Think about it. Everything's polluted. The environment, the government, the schools, you name it.
Good guys now.
We're on 92 FM tonight. It feels like a nice, clean little band. No one else is using it, and price is right.
Are you listening to this?
Yeah, of course I'm listening.
There's nothing to do anymore. And all the great
Themes have been used up, turned into theme parks.
So I don't really find it exactly cheerful to be living in
A totally, exhausted decade where there's nothing to look forward to and no one to look up to.
Everybody knows.
He's got a pirate radio station. Nobody knows who he is.
I could be that anonymous nerd sitting across from you, and when you turn around, and he just looks away. Never looks back at you again.
This is a song for the 90s.
Welcome to Dorina Central. May I take your order, please?
Yeah, I want...
That was deep.
I like the idea that a voice can just go somewhere uninvited, like a dirty thought in a nice, clean mind.
I know you. Not your name, but your game. Come to me, or I'll come to you.
So you are him.
Yes, who? It's me again with a little attitude for all you out here in white bread land.
It's 10 o'clock. Do you care where your parents are?
This radio person is the whole problem. Are we going to allow this guy to be heard by anyone who can turn a dial?
In jail! I'm gonna stay here! I like it here!
And he's trying to tell you that there's something wrong with this school.
Man, you're not supposed to be here. What do you want to slam me? Come on, Bill, I'm a big fan of yours. Get out. Get out!
This is out of control.
Why not do something crazy? It makes a hell of a lot more sense than blowing your brains out.
FCC, you know what that means?
This phone call has been traced.
This is my life you're screwing around with here, you know?
Not anymore, it isn't. This is everyone's life. Mark, you can't leave it like this.
You out there? You listening?
And that was the trailer for Pump Up the Volume. And you have no idea how difficult it was to track this movie down. See, I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat, and I think these rebel-rousing movies are a little hard to come by. I had to find this movie on eBay. I couldn't even find it on Amazon. It's not on any streaming service. I really had to go out of my way to track it down. And thankfully, it wasn't that much. And interestingly enough, I went through a similar experience with the movie JFK. That one, I couldn't find. They don't even make a Blu-ray copy of JFK. And certainly JFK has some of its problems, historical problems, but on balance, the overall thesis of the military-industrial complex being responsible for the death of the president is, I believe, a correct one. But, yeah, so JFK I had to find in a used DVD store, and it was one of those early DVDs, the ones that didn't have special features, and if you play it on an HD TV, the screen is like, it's a 2/3 size of your screen. It's very strange. And thankfully I was able to find a decent copy of Pump Up the Volume. But Pump Up the Volume is a movie about a disillusioned teen who goes by the handle Happy Harry Hardon. And I don't even remember his real name. I think it's like Byron or Brian or something. But I don't know. If you guys met me, you'd probably call me Fireside and not my real name either. Like my real name really matters. Although I think some of you may have tracked me down from my super chats. I don't go to great lengths to disguise who I am on that. And if I'm paying you money, I figure you're probably going to keep my confidence. So, whatever. Anyway, movie's about this disillusioned teen with, surprise, boomer parents that have mainly sold out. And he goes to this school, and because his father's high up in the school, he learns about the school basically cooking the books and kicking certain students out in order to keep their numbers high. And but whoops, they don't fully kick the students out. They actually keep the students on the books in order to continue receiving the per student spending for those students. Just a side note, we have similar things happening with undocumented people. That's why they're allowed to go to school. But moving on. And so he has this radio show, this shortwave radio. And his bedroom basically is a studio, and he does his act and plays, at the time, some really obscure and underground music. Like Soundgarden, for example. Soundgarden in 1990. If you heard Soundgarden compared to the music of the time, the music of the 80s that was rock music, like Whitesnake or Poison, and then you heard Soundgarden and Alice in Chains and Nirvana, you would just be like, whoa, what the fuck is that? And that's what a lot of us did. That's what I did. I really liked it. Heretic, the song by Soundgarden, Heretic, became one of my favorite songs of that time. Really liked that song, and it really introduced the world to a lot of the coming music. So yeah, it was an interesting time to be alive, in that you really had two genres of music that were very different, achieving a great deal of popularity, and both of them dealt with angst. That is gangsta rap, of which also Happy Harry Hard-On played some, and what came to be known as grunge. So I really enjoyed this movie, and so the angst, the sense of feeling of unwellness that the movie has really does a good job of setting the tone for the 90s. The thing that I think really connects it to the 80s would probably be The Girlfriend. I think if this movie had been made in maybe 95 instead of 1990, or had come out in 95 instead of 1990, I think he and The Girlfriend probably never would have connected, and she would have been a cutter and he would have killed himself. But there's still just a hint of optimism in here, and that they put in a little bit of a teen romance. But yeah, he rabble rouses, and because his father works for the school district, he gets this private information, and he makes prank phone calls to, while he's on air, mind you, to some of the faculty and some of the staff of the school that he goes to, and confronts them with this information. Very kind of Luke. If any of you are familiar with alternative news media and are familiar with We Are Change and Luke Radowski, it's a prototypical Luke Radowski type of confrontation. And so he does that, and he also takes calls. He takes calls from his fellow students, and Brian, I think that's the character's name, in real life is shy, is introverted, and doesn't talk a whole lot. But people also don't recognize him because he uses a voice disguiser. That's what they call it in the movie, a voice disguiser. And so people call up and they talk to him and they ask him questions. And, one student said, I'm gonna blow my fucking brains out. You don't believe me? And he's like, oh no, why would you want to do that? You're not going to be one of the... And he's not taking it seriously, because part of the way the story is masterfully set up is he gets calls from people that are fucking with him and telling untruths. And so he's just like having fun with it. And then it turns out that this person hung up the phone and really did, in fact, commit suicide. So he gets on the radio of the radar, of the authorities. And, he wants to give up being Happy Harry Hard-On after that. But the girl that he ends up with a romantic interest in works in the library and sees the books that he's been checking out, like Talk Hard from Lenny Bruce, etc., and recognizes some, I guess if any of you have watched on the Netflix, they did a special on the Unabomber. I guess she recognized him from his idiolect, if you've watched that, meaning the way that he spoke. She recognized certain phrases from that book. And so she stalks him, and And she says, "Oh no, Happy Harry Hard On, you've got to get back on the air. You can't. People are counting on you. They love you. Oh my God." Well, she doesn't say that, "Oh my God," but you get the picture. It's just, I need to cheer myself up somehow after a long and horrible grind of a day. And doing voices does that for me. So she says no, and she's like, "Get away. You don't know I'm him. I'm not him. I'm not me. Yeah, it's not me." And then eventually he's sitting there and he says, "This is my life." You know, he gets to his room and it's later at night and he does the webcast, or I'm sorry, the radio broadcast. And he says, "This is the last night for Happy Harry Hard On." And then everybody, because it's a shortwave radio, there's only a few spots that get good reception. And all of his peers, people that probably would have nothing to do with him, they wouldn't stop to spit on him in the school, love his show. And so he sits there for a second and thinks about what the girl told him. And then he fires it back up and he's like, "Hey, look, you know," he's like, "Depression is real. It's a real thing. But you have your whole life ahead of you. If you're in school, you know, this is a small part of your life that you're going to have to endure, and it's going to suck." And he takes some more calls, and one call was by this boy that had a confusing encounter with these jocks, these football players in his school. I guess they had these football players were able to ascertain his sexual orientation, and they were able to get him to strip naked, and they humiliated him. And he was somewhat suicidal too. And Happy Harry Hard On, being the good listener that he is, he said, "You're not the one that's confused. They're the ones that are confused." And so I made him feel better. And then he goes on the radio and he says, "Get out your aggressions. Everybody get crazy. Get out there." And, you know, and like one girl put a bunch of metal in the microwave and it blew up and she fucked herself up. And it's just such a good movie. Boy, my generation really screwed the pooch when it came to making teen movies later on. I mean, what did we get? We got Dazed and Confused. That wasn't even about my generation. I digress. Moving on. So all that happens. And just a side note here, when I'm thinking back to my high school years, which were in the early 90s, pre-95, I can confirm that the football players, with all their towel-flicking, vulgar displays of nudity and ass-grabbing, probably the gayest people in the school. No judgment on anyone here, but seriously, those guys really, really worshipped maleness. That's all I'm going to say about that. Moving on. So, yeah, it's an amazing movie. And so, you know, obviously after kids are blowing stuff up and graffiti is showing up, they're like, "Happy Harry Hard On." They're spray painting it everywhere. Kids are having outbursts. "Oh my God, he's dead. The kid killed himself because the school's sucking the life out of everybody." And that kind of stuff's happening. There's starting to be outward displays of hostility towards the staff and the faculty. And so eventually the school authorities bring in the FCC. So to track down his license. Now, that's one of the wonderful things about webcasting and podcasting is that you don't need any of that bullshit. The FCC, like many government agencies, if we're just going to do an aside here, a side note, there's corruption involved. Lyndon Baines Johnson, famously, his wife, I think in the city of Dallas, there was, in a city like Dallas, it only had one TV station, and it was owned by Lady Bird Johnson. And a lot of his payola came through ads running through the station that he owned, the Soul Station in Dallas, Texas. The FCC, you know, they will crack down on political speech with the use of their licenses. And so a shortwave radio and a broadcast like that really, if you listen to my the FCC should really only be concerned with radio waves going across state lines. And, okay, this radio wave is going across this state line, so you can't have two radio stations broadcasting on the same frequency. That should be the extent of their powers. But I digress. It's a movie. And it is real life. And in real life, if you're broadcasting a radio transmission or a television transmission, the FCC, you're going to have to get a license from the FCC, whether it crosses state lines or not. It's ridiculous, and it's the tyranny that we live under, but what are you going to do? Anyhow, the FCC comes in, and so his girlfriend, oh my God, Happy Harry Hardon, you've got to get out of here. They're coming for you. Oh, no. And so she gets there, and somebody's called the police, and they've managed to track, I guess, do a trace on his phone number. But he was using the phone. He had, I guess, hacked into his neighbor's landline. And this is in the age of landlines, kids. Landline phone. And so they raided his neighbor, who was like an 80-year-old lady, and they hauled this 80-year-old lady off to jail and searched her house. And he gets his shortwave equipment and sticks it in his girlfriend's Jeep Wrangler, and they drive around to try and avoid the FCC detecting his radio signal by triangulating it. So he's moving, and then eventually his voice disguiser gets broken. And then eventually he meets up at the spot where he knows everybody listens to his broadcast that gets the best reception. And he reveals himself. And so I think in the movie, he gets a standing ovation and people are cheering him, and it's a big deal. And he goes to jail, and then the end of the movie is it goes dark, and you hear all kinds of different teenagers broadcasting on shortwave radios, like he'd really started something. I think in reality what would have happened was that they would have seen who it was. They would have seen that it was a nerdy, unpopular kid, and they would have turned on him. I think in real life that's what would have happened. But, you know, what do I know? That's what I think would have happened. So, wow, I don't even have one viewer right now, do I? Fascinating. But that's okay. You know, I haven't done a live stream in a while, so it's to be expected. But this one's way overdue. So this is one of my favorite movies of all time. Pump Up the Volume with Christian Slater, and I just wanted to talk to you a bit about it because I think it's an amazing film. And if any of you are out there and you haven't seen it, it's extremely hard to come by, but if you're here in Northern California, like I am, pretty easy to find. You just head into a Dimple Records, or you look on eBay, and you can find a copy for like 10, 12, 15 bucks. And I definitely recommend picking it up because, if anything, it's got a pretty good soundtrack. And I really, really, really like the soundtrack. It's just brings back so many memories for me. And it just reminds me of how different things are now. You know, you had to have a landline phone, and in my house, even though there were cordless phones, and we're talking cordless, not cellular, you still had to plug the phone into the wall. Then you had a handset, and it had a limited range. It was all analog too. And in my house, my mother didn't believe in that because she was afraid people could listen in on her calls. And so she bought, I kid you not, she bought a 50-foot cord for the kitchen phone. And it was not unusual for her to cook, to walk around the house, and to go outside on the patio and like water the plants while chatting on this landline telephone with a 50-foot cord. And she got real fancy because she got one of those there was a swivel attachment you could put on the end of the cord. We had one of those too. And, yep. Yeah, I mean, interesting times. And just a side note, her fears were validated when my brother picked up a police scanner from, like, Salvation Army. I think it was Salvation Army. It was someplace like Salvation Army. Or maybe it was the Army, the Army Navy Depot. It might have been there. But there was a police scanner he picked up, and wow, he would just go to sleep listening in on the neighbors. And I tell you, I hate him that he was very nosy and that he used to go through my shit all the time as a teenager. But I'm partially just blown away by some of the conversations that I had overheard with him from cordless phones on his police scanner. Like, we overheard these young parents like blowing weed smoke in their kid's face and getting their kid high and getting their dog high. We overheard the across the street neighbor having an affair, and then we overheard her boyfriend getting talking to a lawyer about being indicted for Medicare fraud, and then we overheard a conversation about somebody that had met Quentin Tarantino. This was around the time that Pulp Fiction had come out. And that was where I first heard of the Marcellus's soul was in the suitcase theory. Apparently, Quentin Tarantino had told someone, you know what's in the suitcase? It's Marcellus's soul. So, yeah, doing dumb, weird stuff like that. It takes me back. It takes me back to my childhood. And, I pretty much wore all black all during high school. So, if I had it to do over again, I probably would have had a little bit more variety. And I probably would have done a lot of things differently. But certainly the tone that this movie has, it takes me back. Puts me in my happy place. It makes me think of the good things that happened when I was a kid. So, that's about all I have on Pump Up the Volume. Highly recommend you pick it up. From the beautiful state of Jefferson, this has been Fireside Chats. See ya. Thanks for listening. This has been Fireside Chats. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell for great content from the beautiful state of Jefferson, near the foothills of Northern California. A state of mind, if not a state in fact. This has been Fireside Chats. See ya.